welcome to Soul Space. Over the past few months, we've been looking at the verses in the New Testament where Jesus set out his teaching to the disciples about those who are really loved and blessed. Let's focus for a moment in a time of prayer and silence. In this moment of quiet, we step away from the noise of the street, from the business of our day, to focus our thoughts on you, loving Christ, who welcomes each one of us and everything we carry. The sadness that bleaches the color from our life, the anxiety that takes our breath away, the prejudice that blocks our path, and the anger that boils in us at the injustices we see around us. We bring all of this to you and lay it aside for a time as we step into the message of joy and hope that you taught us through your beloved disciples. Today we're looking at the final verse of Jesus' teaching in the opening section of the Sermon on the Mount, known as the Beatitudes. Rejoice and be glad, for great is your reward in heaven. Jesus had taken his disciples away from the large crowd that had followed them and was taking some time to set out the fundamental teaching of his mission. Essentially, echoing the prayer that his mother had prayed in the Magnificat, that the normal way of doing things in their culture was being turned upside down. That those normally considered to be on the lowest rung of society, or the troublemakers who were advocating for them, are the most privileged and blessed in God's eyes. Jesus never made any bones about the fact that it was going to be really hard to follow him and his teachings. The disciples had already left literally everything behind them. They had no home, no form of income, no status, no security. But Jesus gives them hope and a reason to go with him. As Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote, his rejection will be theirs. Jesus blesses them because by following his call, they are now poor, afflicted, and hungry. They were seeking something that under the social or legal structures of their day would never be available to them. By losing everything, they were gaining everything. The disciples came from the same places and circumstances as the people in the crowds. As Jesus set out this new vision of society, they knew he was talking about the people around them and recognized themselves there too. We view the people that Jesus calls blessed in these verses as being on the margins of society. What does that say about our own perspective? These are the people at the very center of God's love, but do we still judge them by the world's standards? When we adopt this new attitude, it changes everything and begins to seep into our every thought and action. The way we act in our own life tells the world who Jesus is. As well as recognizing our own value in God's eyes, we can bring blessing to those that Jesus blessed. We see sorrow and persecution all around us. We may be suffering ourselves because of our values and actions, but we're assured that this is something that should make us rejoice and be glad, literally to leap for joy. How strange, how bizarre, how counterintuitive. But this really is the good news of the gospel, that the very people who have been despised and excluded all of their lives have suddenly been promoted to the front of the queue, to VIP status in God's eyes. And when we adopt this perspective, surely we'll feel overjoyed at the prospect of injustice being turned on its head and those who suffer being comforted and restored. We feel seen and understood in our own troubles, and we're moved to act and to make those promised blessings into worldly reality. The Spirit gives us life when we're frightened or confused and moves us to do God's work. Jesus taught us to pray, "Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." Is the promise then that we can experience heavenly joy as we work towards heaven on earth? To quote the writer Kate Bowler, the world looks a bit strange from here, upside down, but maybe it's how it's supposed to be, our feet rooted in heaven. The words of this traditional South African song, Mayenziwe Ntando Yako, are translated as "Your will be done on earth, O Lord." But what about that uncomfortable second part of the verse? In the same way they persecuted the prophets before you. Scottish theologian William Barclay asked why persecution was inevitable. His answer was that the church is bound to be the conscience of the nation and society, and inevitably some people will try to silence the troublesome voice of conscience. It is not likely that death awaits us because of our loyalty to the Christian faith, but insult and mockery awaits those who insist on Christian honor, who practice Christian love and forgiveness. Barclay concludes that Christ still needs his witnesses. He needs those who are prepared not so much to die for him as to live for him. Throughout the Bible, we see examples of God's solidarity with the downtrodden and dispossessed. Moses is chosen to disrupt the status quo and leads the Israelites out of generations of enslavement. And in the Psalms, there are many songs of praise that recognize the compassion and protection offered to God's people. The Lord upholds all who are falling and raises up all who are bowed down. And we have Jesus' own words of encouragement to his followers. I am not alone because the Father is with me. I have said this to you so that in me you may have peace. In the world you face persecution, but take courage. I have conquered the world. So despite the difficulties we endure, we should rejoice in the promise we have of great reward in heaven and make a joyful noise as we do God's work in the world. And we must look back over millennia to the people who were called to follow God's way, to go against the accepted culture or government of their day, to fight for God's will to prevail. They go ahead of us, showing the way. I'm not just thinking of Old Testament prophets like Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, those who would die rather than worship a false god, or the Christian martyrs, or those who are still persecuted today for following this call to love that can be so aggravating and threatening to others. We also remember and celebrate the troublemakers who risk their liberty, jobs, friendships, or social status to fight for peace and for the rights and status of those who are consistently overlooked, abused, or excluded. The conscientious objectors and peace marchers, the civil rights activists, climate campaigners, those who take part in civil disobedience, this great cloud of witnesses who we stand with in solidarity. We are blessed to be standing on the shoulders of these giants, firm in the hope and promise, not just of a reward in heaven, but actively working to see the kingdom of heaven lived out here on earth during our lifetime. When we look, we see there is so much to celebrate. Blessed are we when we work to usher in God's kingdom of love and compassion and justice and forgiveness and peace, even when it's hard. Let's close with a blessing from Romans 15. May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in your faith, so that in the power of the Holy Spirit you may be rich in hope. Thank you for being here today. There's some reflections and handouts there if you'd like to stay for a little while or take them away with you. Thank you.